Hello and welcome back to Impact Factor. I'm your host, Katie Van Aken, and today's episode, I am interviewing a good friend of mine. We went to grad school together, Sarah Gleeson, and she is a recent finalist in the Berkeley Lab Slam, which is a presentation competition, and you're going to hear all about it in our conversation. And I'm really excited for you to hear from her. She's a great person, great scientist, and enjoy. Okay, well, let's get started. So, I'm here with Sarah, and Sarah, tell me a little bit about your path to your PhD. Where did you go? What did you get it in? And take it away.
Katie. So my path to my PhD, where do you want me to start? Uh,
Well, let's start with where did you go? Well, okay, let's actually start with this. I haven't started with this before. Let's start with what made you decide to get your PhD?
yeah, that is an interesting question. I think it was a few different things. So I will take a step backwards from that actually. I did my undergrad at Case Western and I majored in biomedical engineering because to me, I was finding a lot of motivation in my studies and in the research I did in undergrad for medical applications and really feeling I could help people with their health. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after undergrad, so I just took some time off. I kind of stepped away from science for a little bit, and I actually spent a year volunteering and used that time to kind of evaluate what I wanted to do and like what path I would take moving forward because of that. Um, So I guess in taking a step back and really thinking about, what were the things that I learned about in undergrad that I thought were the most interesting, I kept coming back to the material science classes that I had taken. I really enjoyed them. I actually got a minor in polymer science, and I think once I was able to get a little bit of distance from kind of the day to day of being immersed in undergraduate, then I was able to think about like, okay, what are the kinds of things that I would really like to learn more about? And I kept coming back to polymers. And so, I thought about going and finding a job in that area, but I did feel like I wanted to learn more first. I also just, I've kind of always been a little bit of a school person. So I think part of it too is that was my comfort zone. And I did go into it knowing that if it just wasn't working out, then I didn't have to stick with it. I could have done something else, but it felt like the right next step to take to learn a lot more, and I think to get the types of jobs that I would be interested in, where I was um, in more of a decision making role in terms of guiding research directions and things like that.
Were you able to do any research specifically in undergrad?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
I researched in the same lab for a few years, which was really nice because it got some continuity. I worked with Dr. Agata Exner, and it was doing very biomedical work. We were making ultrasound contrast agents and imaging them using ultrasounds. And so I got a chance to do research there during the school year and also full time for a few summers. And I got to go to a conference through that. So it was a good experience to kind of get my feet wet with some research. So I knew what I was getting into a little bit with grad school.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because it's one thing to know what you want to learn more about. It's another thing to know what 5 years of research is gonna look like. And so I think I'm glad that you had that experience. I think more people should take that experience in undergrad before they, jump into a PhD.
I agree. I think, I definitely ran into a lot of snags with even just the research that I was doing on the undergrad level. So I knew what I was in for in terms of like if a project isn't working and how miserable it can sometimes feel to troubleshoot, but also, it can be a good feeling. Um, yeah, and I think, if like you had gone through undergrad and hadn't had that research experience, I still think there are probably ways to you could do a post back or even just spend a summer somewhere. I think there's ways to kind of get that experience, even if you didn't maybe plan ahead for it in advance.
Yeah, very cool. So you volunteered and then you applied to grad school. And did you make the jump to material science in particular because of your interest in polymers?
Yeah. So I applied to schools mostly in big cities on the East Coast. That was something that was important to me. That also helped taking a year off and, being able to evaluate, like what is my life like when I'm not in school and which parts of that do I want to keep. So it was important to me to stay in a city and to, not be across the country from my family. That was something that I thought would be like a good support system through grad school. Um, and sorry, I lost your question.
It's okay. It was you switched to material science. So did you only
Right, thank you.
apply to material science? Yeah.
I applied to materials science, I think exclusively, unless a school had a polymer department. So some
Mm.
schools have like macromolecular engineering, and then I would usually be applying there. Um, I don't think I applied to any other departments. Yeah.
It's cool. I like the fact that you reflected on what almost specific classes you took in your undergrad major and that sort of dictated where you wanted to go next, which wasn't like a clear like biomedical to biomedical, but that's also the benefit of material science. I feel like a lot of people come from different undergraduate majors.
Yeah, that was something that was really cool. I thought most of the people that I met in our department at Drexel were from different non-materials backgrounds. So it gave a lot of diversity and different perspectives and really cool research that people were actually bringing into the department. And the same kind of went for the professors too. I feel like a lot of them actually did their degrees in different fields and everyone kind of comes together. And it gives materials this really kind of vast and broad feeling, but also very multidisciplinary, which is cool. I totally forgot to mention, I also did some research at Ohio State as an undergrad, and that was just like after my freshman year for one summer, but that was in the materials department at Ohio State. So during that year that I took off, that was something that I kept coming back to, even though I thought the kind of motivating problems behind a lot of the biomedical research and classes that I had been taking in undergrad, I thought that was good. Sorry, there's going to be some cat. I thought that was really motivating in terms of, why you're working on those things. But I kept coming back to like the actual science behind a lot of the problems. I found a lot more excited to work on things that I had been working on in the material science research I was doing as opposed to more on the biology side. So I think that's kind of what convinced me to make the switch.
Your cat's really excited about your research.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Is that a happy noise?
It's just a constant noise.
Oh, it's just a noise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It might be a hungry noise. I don't know.
Um, so here's a question. Let's back up and tell our odd listeners, what polymers are
Fans.
and and what your fans, yes, and what your research was like, or what your research was in grad school.
So I went to grad school with Katie at Drexel in the material science department, and I worked in Chris Lee's lab. And my research, it was, I think a good kind of bridge between what I had been doing before and kind of what I wanted to move towards, which was I was doing a project that was bio-inspired, but pretty much was a material science project. So I designed materials that mimicked the structure of bone. And so, I was looking at new ways to get really carefully controlled nanostructured materials and kind of fundamentally understand how they assemble. And then we were able to kind of scale them up into larger scale things and look at, how can these materials be used to replicate tissues that we'd find in the body. So I never took the project in the direction of actually doing testing in animals or even with cells, but I did collaborate with Tony Yu. So he was a biomedical engineer. And so the two of us were working on this project, and he was able to kind of come at it from like a biological side, and I was able to come at it from a materials side. So it was kind of the best of everything, where it's, this project that it's very clear, what the impact would be and what the motivation is. But then I got to kind of do the interesting science problems that really were more up my alley, and, work with someone who could kind of answer the other side of those things.
That's cool. Yeah, because I feel like sometimes in engineering in particular, you almost expect to take it from, building the material to proving the application. And it sounds like in your case, you were able to partner with someone who focused on one half while you did another, which is a cool sort of collaboration.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a really good way to do it, is to, be able to make those kind of bridges, because I think it's a lot of times in grad school and after grad school, it's really easy to feel like you kind of have to do everything yourself, and that's really daunting. So being able to pair up with other people that are complementary to you is really helpful.
Um, I want to come back to this, but I first want to find out if while you were doing your PhD, did you have any sort of inkling to what was next, or were you sort of just rolling on through until it was time to think about that?
Um, I guess kind of both. I definitely, some people go into a PhD with a very clear, like, I'm going to use this to become a professor, or I'm going to use this to get a six-figure salary in industry afterwards. Like some people have really, really clear kind of endpoints they're trying to hit. And I have always felt really open-minded and trying to have the perspective of, what is or isn't working about what I'm doing right now, and how can the next thing I do kind of take me in the right direction. And I still kind of feel like I'm in that mindset. And, I personally think that's like a good way to approach things. So,
Yeah, I think that openness in general too, because like you never, like, yes, they say that, in your first year you're going to do this and second year you're going to do this, but research is not like that, right? It doesn't go to plan most of the time. So even to plan to go to industry in 5 years is sort of not always going to happen. So
yeah, definitely.
skill.
And I think it can be good to, know what you want and to go for it. Like that's really admirable. And I feel like I have a hard time with that. But I also think there's something to be said for just taking what comes your way. And that could go for research, right? If you get an interesting result, maybe I think it can be bad if you follow too many tangents, but it can also lead to something that's really cool. If you get an interesting result and you kind of pull at that thread a little bit, maybe you just hit on like chapter for your thesis right there or something like that. As opposed to, like you were saying, sticking with the plan, which is hard to do. But I think it also, having a plan like that can mean that you maybe are like blind to some opportunities.
Yeah. So speaking of that, where did you end up, or where are you right now?
Now I'm doing a postdoc at Berkeley National Lab, which is in the Bay Area in California. So that really did come about because I was kind of keeping an open mind. Like I definitely was not intending to do a postdoc. This is actually the only postdoc that I applied to, and something about it just felt right, and so I did it, and it's been a really good experience.
Are you doing similar science, or similar in the sense that it's polymers and that's it?
I think similar in the sense that it's polymers. There's some overlap. I actually do a lot of work with one of the same polymers that I did a lot of work with in grad school, but the types of things I'm doing with it are really different. So my research right now is I look at assemblies of molecules at liquid interfaces. So looking at, locking different liquids into place, and stabilizing different compartments over time using basically assemblies of molecules. So, in my mind, I think there's not a lot of overlap between this and what I was doing in grad school, which I think is a really good thing. I'm learning a lot, and it's, been a real growth experience. I
is
understand that from
doing
the outside, people are like, it sounds the same. You're doing
well, yeah, I
polymers.
mean, as a battery person, polymers are that's about as much as I know about polymers is you make them. Um, but also, what are there differences? So you're at Berkeley, so it's a national lab, or are you
It's a
at
national lab.
the
Yeah.
university? Okay. What's that like in comparison to like doing research in an academic setting?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit different. Like it still is an academic setting, definitely.
Hmm.
That's the feel it has, that's kind of the approach everyone has. And I didn't really know what to expect. So before I took this postdoc, I talked to some of my friends. I know people from Drexel that actually had worked at Berkeley Lab in particular. And so I was able to talk to them and just kind of ask the exact same question. And I think in general, it's a really nice place to be. You get this feeling of doing some like really state of the art research and just being surrounded by really intelligent people, but it also has a lot of the perks of feeling a little bit more like a normal job. So I think the hours are a lot more regular. Like I really don't work evenings or weekends unless, I have a deadline coming up and I'm writing or working on my computer at home or something like that. Then sometimes I will. But in general, that kind of feeling that I sometimes get from academic institutions where there's a lot of pressure to kind of always be doing more and always working and everyone around you is always working. I think those boundaries between home and work are a lot clearer at the National Lab. I think the pace is a little bit more relaxed, which has good and bad things. Sometimes it's nice that there's a little bit less pressure and, everyone has a little bit more ease going about things. But on the other hand, it sometimes means if you have something you need to get done quickly, it can be hard to get done quickly. Sometimes you have to wait on supplies to come in or people to be able to train you, and there's a little bit less urgency about that. Yeah, it's great. There's state of the art equipment where I work, and everybody is really nice. And especially at Berkeley Lab, we are up in the Berkeley Hills, so I can see the Golden Gate Bridge from my desk. Like, I mean, it's just like a really beautiful, nice place to work. Recommend
My
it.
impression of a national lab, and this is from never having worked at one, is that doing a postdoc in a national lab, the biggest difference is you don't have like graduate students to tell them what to do.
Mm.
But perhaps because you're at Berkeley and there's a relationship there, maybe that's not as drastic.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Like, my lab and almost everyone I meet is postdocs or more senior than that. We have a couple grad students in my lab and we have a couple undergrads, and they're like amazing researchers that know so much. But in general, yeah, it kind of inverts those numbers.
Yeah.
Joining like an academic lab, you expect it to be mostly grad students, and here it's definitely mostly postdocs. So that's the kind of interesting. I join a lab and all of a sudden I'm the newest and least
Yeah.
experienced person in the lab, which is kind of nice. It's a little intimidating to think about, starting in what I consider to be like a pretty new field, but also being a postdoc in an academic lab and being like relied on by other people to know things. Like
Right.
there is some pressure to that I didn't really feel. I think that's been a little different since the pandemic too. Like I know that during the pandemic, basically undergrad researchers, I don't think could come up to the national lab, or if they could, it was really restricted. Um, so I have heard since I started 2021 in the national lab. So it was kind of like right in the middle of all the COVID restrictions. And so it's hard for me to say maybe like what normal would be because
Sure.
we're not quite back to where we were before that either. So I think there used to also be more students around than there maybe are in my experience.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I always thought that that was like something to keep in mind if your plan was to get a postdoc and you were sort of thinking about, university setting or national lab setting, and I felt like that could be a pretty strong difference into like maybe the existence of or lack of a hierarchy and where you fit into it, and you know all of the pressure like you said about like people relying on you in
Mhm.
certain situations.
Yeah. That depends too on like, your lab and your
Yeah.
project that you're working on. I think there's good and bad, like I mentioned, I personally like joining a lab and not immediately feeling like I had to know what I was doing.
Right.
It's also nice joining, a research area and not feeling like the old person. I feel like people,
Yeah, that
like
is
it's
a
kind of
perk.
nice. My coworkers in general are like, my age and kind of my uh, at the similar point in their lives as I am.
Yeah,
So that's kind of
that's very
nice. Like it
important.
really syncs up pretty well. So it's been really fun being able to be friends with my coworkers too. Um, yeah, I guess one thing to consider would be if you were trying to use your postdoc as kind of a stepping stone towards more of an academic job. If you did want that experience mentoring, I think there is that experience at a national lab, but it might just be something you have to seek out more. You have to find some undergrads to bring on, or maybe there's just fewer students around. So I think there are opportunities to mentor, but maybe less so than being in an academic lab. Sorry about this cat.
Okay. I think she wants to be on the microphone, you know. She's
Yeah,
waiting for her close up.
I think that's what everyone wants, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, so since you've been at Berkeley, I heard through the news channels that you won this event called the Berkeley Lab Slam. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. The news channel is me texting you.
Yeah, well,
Because
it felt very
Katie
official.
Katie helped me. Yeah, thanks. Katie helped me practice and perfect my slam talk. So she was someone that I was excited to tell when it went well. This is a competition just within Berkeley Lab for kind of early career researchers. So that could be postdocs or it could be more people on the project scientist level that are, I think it's 5 or 7 years out from having got their PhD. So everyone's kind of in an early state. And it's pretty similar to a 3-minute thesis, if that's something that, the people listening have heard of before. We had that at Drexel, and it's essentially a 3-minute monologue with one static slide that you can have. And you just have to talk about your research in a way that's really understandable. So we had basically a 3-minute monologue competition at the lab, and that happened last month.
That's awesome. So you were able to explain your pretty like nuanced research in a way that people voted, or were there judges?
There were judges. There was also a voting component, but I didn't win that part. Um, I won the judging part. Yeah,
That's good.
it was challenging. I guess I always felt really comfortable with the work that I did in grad school in terms of motivating the work. At Drexel, we had a kind of in-house conference. The whole conference was geared towards very general audience communication. So that's something I had participated in grad school, and I really enjoy kind of the challenge of having to describe the things that you're just like in so deep with every day. Having to take that step back and talk to people about it is something that I really liked while I was in grad school. But my work in grad school was all motivated by medicine, and that to me is a really easy thing to talk about, right? I was able to kind of have this narrative that, was even part of my PhD defense where I'm like, hey, it's bad when your bones break, right? Like, wouldn't it be
Yeah.
great if we could fix your bones better? And like in general, everyone listening would be like, yeah, that's right. That sounds
Yes.
important. I've broken a
I
bone.
have bones. Yeah.
Yeah, I know about bones.
Yeah.
I could just like when your motivation can be things like medicine's important, everyone's like, okay, we're on the same page with you. Keep going, tell us.
Yep.
And I kind of feel that way about even like, battery research, right? I think it can be difficult to narrow it from things like medicine or batteries down to specifically what you do, but at least like the starting point is something that people relate to. Yeah, and something I've found really challenging about the work I do now is that, I think scientifically it's really interesting and it is really important work, but it's very fundamental. And there's a little bit more of a jump between what I do and kind of the why other people should care about it. So that is something that, I think having to do this exercise of basically distilling it down into a couple of minutes that anyone could understand and kind of get on board with. It's something that was actually like really, really helpful to me in terms of how I like think about my research and talk about it, and how I write about it, things like that.
That's great. Yeah. No, you bring up a good point because when you think about, even just from a science perspective, the government funds all kinds of quote fundamental research, and you have to sell your ideas to somebody who's going to give you money. And if, and if it, and if it's so fundamental that that value is hard to see, that's the real challenge is how do you express that? And I think
Yeah.
it's even harder than doing the research sometimes, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just something that helps every part of your life, right? If you're going for a job, you're basically trying to pitch yourself. If you're trying to do a startup and get funding, that's a pitch. Like
Yes.
all of these kind of are the same skill set where you have to, really efficiently get your point across and get the importance across, and kind of keep people's attention. And that is a skill, yeah, that comes in grant writing, is so important, and it's really, really hard to do. Um,
Very cool.
yeah.
Well, congrats on your victory. What's next for that?
Thanks. What's next is there's kind of one more step of slam competition. So the national labs in the Bay Area, so Berkeley, Livermore, Slack, and Sandia, are all doing kind of a regional competition for slam. So they each had their own little speaking competition, and then the finalists are going to get together actually next week,
Ooh,
and compete. So
very cool. Is
yeah.
it in person? Like, are you
It
standing
is
on
in
a
person.
stage?
Yeah, it's on a
Mm,
stage, which has been kind of nerve-wracking, actually. I am a very, very nervous public speaker.
yeah.
Um, and also during COVID, I think I just got so comfortable doing presentations on Zoom. Like I did my PhD defense over Zoom, and that, the ability to like close everyone's video and not have to look at people in the eye or like think about my body language, like
Just
those were
talking.
things. Yeah, it was just kind of talking at my computer. And so at first that was uncomfortable, and then I got really comfortable with it. And so making the switch back into in person has been kind of daunting, but it's coming back slowly.
That's good. Yes, that adds a level of, I think, challenge and maybe uncomfort to people, but it's also like how investor meetings are done normally, in a non-pandemic world. So
Mhm.
also a very important challenge.
Yeah, and the more I'm like practicing, the more I'm realizing it's easier to be an effective speaker when you can do it in person. Like things, that maybe are hard to practice or nail, like body language, also
Mm,
do a really good job of kind of helping to sell what you're talking about. I've been watching a lot of TED
yes.
Talks to get ready.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's good. That's good. I like that a lot. Um, okay, so well, let's go back to your PhD. So when you were there, did you have any like non-research, non-class related activities you were doing?
Like outside of school or
Yeah,
within?
outside of school or inside, whatever. How did you
Yeah,
keep yourself diversified?
I think, I tried to be diverse as a person outside of school, but it was also really important to me to not just put my head down and get through my research, which I think can be really tempting when you just have a lot of deadlines. But I think I'm just not happy that way, and I also like, I don't know, feeling like I'm more involved in kind of my department in the school as a community. So I, did a lot of work with you, Katie, on a lot of these things, but within school, I did a lot of kind of outreach demonstrations. I actually developed a demonstration for the department about the material science behind chocolate, which was like 95% motivated by just like a desire to eat a lot of chocolate. But that's been a good one. Actually,
Sometimes when I have chocolate that melts, I think about that. And I'm
that's
like,
good.
damn it. And then I remember. It's fun.
And then you're like, oh, now I know how to temper chocolate. Thanks, Sarah.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Um, yeah, I actually, uh, my um, facility at Berkeley Lab was doing a series of talks when we weren't allowed to do social events during the pandemic. We were instead
Yeah.
doing like science talks about food. And so I gave the chocolate talk at work at
Oh,
the National
nice.
Lab too. Yeah. No demo, just kind of like me uh, talking about chocolate for 5 minutes, which, yeah, I have a lot to say about chocolate. So I did
Yeah.
things like that when I was at Drexel. I helped organize like a material science camp for high school students. That was a lot of work, a lot of, galvanizing people to volunteer and organizing trips and demonstrations and things. Um, I did a little bit of teaching. I was involved in the editorial board for a student-run journal. So I tried to do things that kind of made me more well-rounded and had me meet people and felt like I was giving back to like the school as a community, um, which those things are really important to me. And I
Yeah.
think through that is also, a lot of my friends were also really involved in things like that. So that was good. And then, yeah, I tried to stay pretty active with things outside of school also. I played a lot of ultimate frisbee while I was in Philadelphia. That was a big thing for me. I ended up eventually kind of backing off the competitiveness during my last year or two of grad school. Part of that was the pandemic kind of forced my hand. But even before that, I did definitely, I think, there were a few summers where I spent, a lot of my time and attention on sports. And as I was getting close to the end of my PhD, I thought maybe that balance needed to like at least temporarily shift. So I kept playing, but I kept it more recreational, so that ultimate was not so much of a, I don't know, a time suck, and also like so it was a little bit less stressful. I was already so kind of stressed about my thesis
Yeah.
that I didn't need the stress of something really competitive on top of it. So I think that was a good call. I also, did a lot of running around Philly. I did a lot of like baking and cooking, especially when the pandemic hit. That was big for me. And a lot of travel. Living on the East Coast. Something that drew me to Philly is I thought it was a great city to live in, but then also I was excited to be able to have kind of easy access to a lot of other places. So I felt like I got some good traveling around the East Coast in while I was there.
That's great. Now you can travel around the West Coast.
Yeah, it's been great.
Um, what? So now that you're sort of 2021, so now that you're like over a year out, is there anything about that time that you sort of miss, like about the PhD lifestyle?
Um, yes, definitely. I mean, in general, I am happier not being in a PhD program. I think there was, and this is the kind of, me as a person too. I don't think this is a universal experience, but I definitely have a hard time giving myself a break when I feel like there's something I should be doing. And in grad school, I kind of always felt like there was something I should be doing. So I was getting a lot of feelings of guilt anytime that I would do something for myself or not be as productive as I should be. And that's a really long time to kind of sit with that feeling. So in general, I think, I've had a good mindset change having gotten out of grad school. But I definitely miss some things. I miss my friends a lot.
Mm,
Katie, you're still in Philly, but I live across the country now. And so I really miss everybody. And also, a lot of my friends from grad school kind of scattered after
yeah.
leaving. And so I kind of miss everybody being together. We had a really good social group that would just, be able to support each other and hang out around Philly. So I definitely really miss that. There's also something nice, I guess this can manifest, like I said, as like a feeling of pressure, but having milestones is something that's sometimes kind of rare in your
Ooh.
life. And having that in a PhD program does give you some kind of short-term things to be working towards. Because I don't
Yeah.
really know any programs that don't have things like qualifying exams, proposals, pre-defenses. Basically, every year, 2 years or so, there's something that you have that's kind of a checkpoint. And so,
And a
it's
victory.
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's like kind of daunting to be like, oh my gosh, a PhD is going to be like, 4 to 7 years, depending on what you're working on.
Yeah.
But if you think of it more in terms of like these kind of like broken down goals, that helps a lot. And that's something that like you don't always have in the real world. And so when you get out of grad school, sometimes you're just like, what am I working towards now? So I think, I've had to find ways to like develop those little goals for myself because I don't have a department setting them for me anymore. But that's
Yeah,
something
that's
that was like kind of nice, that structure.
yeah, that's such a good point. I also went through the same thing because you even spent even undergrad, right? You're spending like undergrad and you're like, I'm working towards this goal and my goal is to graduate, with good grades and whatever. And then you go to grad school, you do the same thing. My goal is to defend and get this degree. And, in the real world, those things that you worked so hard for, those pieces of paper don't really matter, right? It's more like what
Hmm.
you learned along the way. But it's definitely like a mental shift from having some goal that you're trying to reach to being in like the working world where you're just like, well, this is it, the same as it was yesterday, like
Yeah.
my goal is to get home at night so I can watch The Office and go to bed, like it's a very different style.
Yeah. That was a little weird shift. I'm still, like I said, I'm still doing basically an academic postdoc, so
Right.
I'm not working towards any like graduation point, but at least, I'm working towards like, oh, I have a paper I'm trying to get out,
Right.
or, we have like little kind of more minor deadlines for things like that. So I think
That's
it's
good.
just kind of having to, shift the way you think where like, you're working towards those things and maybe there's like a little less pressure on them.
And I think creating them for yourself is important too. And even if it's outside of your career, like if you're taking a language class, and you're doing something else that has this little victory at the end. Very
Yeah,
important.
definitely. And I feel like I've been feeling a little aimless with some things like that. I had a really busy summer of traveling this summer, so that took up all of my time, and I wasn't really feeling so aimless because I kind of constantly was like, all right, next weekend I'm leaving somewhere. I have to get ready for that. And then once all the traveling was done, I definitely noticed a little bit of an odd feeling of like, what's next? And so I've been thinking about maybe like signing up for a race or something,
Nice.
because I personally think I like having, I don't want to say I like deadlines, but I like having like where I'm like, I'm working towards something. And, I
Yeah.
think it's okay for that to not be at work, but it means that maybe I like give myself something outside of work to be like, yeah, I'm working towards this right now.
I read somewhere that millennials are really into pottery right now, that they're all taking pottery classes.
I tried to sign up for a pottery class and I
There's a wait
like
list, right?
there was a wait list. I tried to sign up about 30 seconds after it opened and it was full.
I'm
I
telling
did
you.
not realize millennials are into pottery, but it means that I can't get into pottery because that is actually something I was going to do. I didn't realize it was a trend.
So,
Maybe if it's
but
trending,
that,
I shouldn't do it. I got to find something more unique. I've been thinking about getting into curling. I took a learn to curl.
oh,
Yeah,
did you do it?
I did.
You did.
Not
That's cool.
well, but it was fun.
Yeah, they have a
I think,
facility out here near Philly.
oh, cool. Yeah, I think that's probably like my best shot for getting into the Olympics.
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's too late for anything else.
Um, okay, well, I don't want to keep you for too long, so I want to ask you these questions that I've asked everyone that I think are really useful. So first of all, what um was something that surprised you about getting your PhD? Um, something that wasn't what you expected, maybe.
Yeah, I guess something that I found surprising, maybe maybe in a bad way, is I guess when I was thinking about applying to grad school and then actually going through the application process, which can be like pretty arduous and take a long time and a lot of your energy, I guess I had this impression that like, oh, once you get in and you find where you want to go and you have a lab, you have this like, sense of accomplishment, like you've done it, you're in, that'll be
Hmm.
great. And I felt like once I got to grad school, it didn't feel like that, if that makes any sense. Like
Huh?
in a bigger perspective, like I kind of constantly felt like I maybe didn't have my life together all that much, which is interesting because if I stopped and I took a step back, I'd be like, wow, you got into this graduate program, like things are going okay, even if your research is hitting a roadblock, like, big picture, like things are fine. But like I think when I was actually going through it, I never really had that like sense of accomplishment. I think it's really easy to get bogged down in little setbacks and also the fact that, everyone around you is also in that program, so you don't really feel like I don't know, it doesn't feel like a distinguishing thing necessarily.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that was like a little bit of a surprise. It's really easy to be like, oh, once I do this thing, I will finally feel like I've done it. And then once I
Yeah.
got there, I was like, oh, I don't feel like I've done anything. Um, yeah. So I guess
No,
that's
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 good.
not a great thing, but I think it's important to be like
Yeah, I mean,
to
something that doesn't match your expectations can be good or bad, right? And it was, I think it's important to. One of the things that I've liked about this is that everyone has a very different answer for that question, and a lot of times it's, something that surprised them, and therefore knowing it up front could have changed the way their expectations were set. And so, you
Mhm.
know, so
Yeah,
thank you for
definitely.
your candor. Candor. Is
Oh,
that a
you're
word?
welcome. Yeah,
Yeah. It's a big word for me.
that is a good word. That's like six
Um,
letters. It's crazy.
I know. Okay, so next question is, what advice do you have that you would give yourself when you first started your PhD?
Yeah, so this is very specific to my experience. Hopefully it's
Great.
helpful to someone.
You're
But
talking
like
to
I,
baby Sarah right now. You're talking to
oh,
Sarah from 8 years ago.
yeah,
Weird.
the yeah, 8 years ago. That's so weird.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess a little bit of backstory to my advice. Like I said, I took a year off. I did AmeriCorps for a year, so I was full-time volunteering for a nonprofit, like not doing science. So I really took big step back, and then I got back to grad school and I started taking classes again, which was kind of a shock, and started doing research again. And it had just been like a long time since I was in that mindset. And something I really appreciate is that my advisor, Dr. Lee, was, his approach was, focus on your classes and just come into lab and take this first little bit of time to just explore. Like that was his mindset. And I really appreciate that. I think the fact that he, gives us a lot of flexibility to figure out what we like is great. But I think I would advise myself to approach that very differently. So I took that pretty literally, and I really did just explore. Like I tried to get comfortable with some different um, processing and characterization techniques, and I kind of, tried to go based on some of the past papers from the group and try to do some little things with that. But it was really aimless. And so what I would do if I could do it over is try to give myself a little more structure, especially having just taken a break from researching and from science. I would kind of right off the bat try to pick someone in the lab to at least initially be a mentor and work with that person to develop like a little mini project. Because I think, my mindset when I was first starting out was just kind of like try everything. And
Yeah.
for me personally, that just didn't work out well. It meant that I just felt like I didn't really do anything for the first little bit of grad school. And then it was really hard to kind of get my footing after that. So I think personally, I would have just done a lot better if I could build a foundation to try something with some really kind of specific goals, and then that would be a good way to say like, okay, I've accomplished this, but I don't know if I really like this topic, or this is the type of work that I think I want to be doing. I think that would be an easier platform to build off of. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
interesting. I feel like um still allowing yourself to be creative and try things, but like you said, with the structure of having a goal makes you have that. I mean, we just sort of talked about that like little victory, that milestone. You're like working towards something, but you're allowed to sort of read a paper and be like, this is a crazy idea, but let's try it.
yeah, definitely. But I think even just like approaching science from the perspective of like experimental design is something that is like good to kind of get into that process really early, because it's never like too late to start doing things that way. But I think just like the kind of foundation that builds for all the work you do Really, the earlier you can do it, that way the better. Like that's something we still talk about in my lab, which is, entirely postdocs. Like we're constantly talking about, developing research questions on hypotheses and things that are just so fundamental. But I think like can really easily get like kind of lost in the details of what you're doing.
Yeah. It's interesting. While I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that I took for granted the fact that I was assigned to a graduating PhD student to like shadow and basically ran experiments with him for the first 6 months. And that basically taught me experimental design without me even knowing that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't really have, but I probably should have sought out with some hindsight. I'm like, oh, I should
sure,
have
of
sought
course.
that out. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a postdoc. Yeah, like you said, it could be just like, someone that's been there for 5 years probably knows everything about that lab. And even for little things, like where do you find files or what is the protocol for doing this? There's like, for me, a lot of anxiety about being in a new lab and, it's uncomfortable to
Doing things
constantly be
wrong.
asking questions. So having that person you can just like ask everything of is really nice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last question is, do you have a fun story or experience or something that was just a positive memory that you'll always take with you from your experience?
Oh, I have a lot of positive memories. Like I said, I think, grad school is challenging, but we had really, really good friends. And so a lot of the things that happened inside and outside of school are things that I, still think of really fondly and I miss everyone. One that stands out is I went to MRS. It's the only time I've been to MRS, and I went to the spring meeting.
Research Society.
Materials Research Society. Thank you, Katie.
Welcome.
I went, I think in 2018, I went to that, and there were a few other people from Drexel who were also going, and it was in Phoenix, Arizona. It was my first time to Arizona, but, that was something that like I said, I'm a very anxious public speaker. So being able to get through a presentation at a big conference like that was kind of a big milestone for me. And then afterwards, this group of people from Drexel and I drove up to the Grand Canyon and did some hiking for a couple days. So that was just like really great, especially because, some of the people that I was hiking with were really good friends and some of them were people that I didn't know as well. And so having this kind of mixed group go and just have a really good time taking advantage of some of this conference travel, that was a nice memory.
Yeah, that's great. Conferences well, they're not always good memories, but I feel like a lot of my good memories are tied to conference travel, and I highly recommend it. Insert plug here about conference episode. Of this
You should
podcast.
listen to Katie's conference episode. It's illuminating.
Yeah. All right, very cool. Well, is there anything you want to share? Anything we missed? Any words of wisdom? You can say no. Anything you want to plug?
I guess.
Writing a book? A paper? Are you writing a paper?
We are going to submit a paper on kind of the first project I've been working on in my postdoc in the next few weeks. So far, no, but, hopefully coming out soon. Pay attention. I'm sure I'm on your Google Scholar alerts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess if anyone, or the Bay Area Research Slam is coming up next week.
Yes, tune in.
Should be really, really interesting. You can turn in. It's live streamed, and it's probably also recorded. I'm sure Berkeley Lab's YouTube channel will have some recordings, but it's, at least based on my experience with the Berkeley one, it was like pretty incredible to hear people talk about their work in ways that I could understand, because a lot of them do things that I don't know anything about, and so that's something that's really cool. Yeah. And
also just like to gather the impact of everyone's work. That's the focus of those talks, is like, what am I doing and why?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It kind of gives me this feeling of like, oh, wow, it's like really exciting to be at this place, working near these people that are doing just like pretty incredible things. Yeah. That's
great. Well, good luck with that. I will try and tune in. And thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really great talking to you.
Nice to talk to you. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks to Sarah for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening, and have a great week.